11 years. That's how long the wait was between Devil May Cry 4 and Devil May Cry 5. And in between that time, Capcom would try to reboot the series with an American developer. But the results went about as well as you'd think they would. Meaning not very great. So what would happen to the original series? Would Devil May Cry 4 be the finale? Well, fans would get their answer at the Xbox E3 conference in 2018.
They're demons! I've seen them with my own eyes! Red Grave is completely taken over!
Let us pray for mercy. This is a trial from the heavens above.
Hey, honey. Need assistance?
Hey, you have to hit every single bump in the road? Gonna ruin my groove!
Devil May Cry was back, and fans were ecstatic. I, however, was not one of those fans. If you remember my DMC 1 video, I said I played all the mainline games over the summer in 2020. This was the first time I ever played the games, and before, I would only describe myself as mildly interested in the series. It wouldn't be until 2020 when I would dive headfirst into the series, and Devil May Cry 5 would be the first game I would beat. And I would have told you it was my favorite in the series. Now that I've beaten and reviewed all the previous mainline Devil May Cry games, does Devil May Cry 5 still hold up? Spoiler alert? Yes. This is my review of Devil May Cry 5.
Devil May Cry.
Starting, of course, with the gameplay. This game has 4 playable characters: Dante, Nero, V, and, if you bought the DLC, Virgil. Each of these characters play very differently from each other, so let's go through my least favorite to my most favorite, starting out with V. Out of all the characters, V is easily the most unique character to play as. You see, V doesn't attack enemies, he leaves that up to his demon partners, Panther, Griffin, and Nightmare. Panther is focused on melee attacks, while Griffin is focused on ranged attacks. They are the main way you're able to attack enemies in this game, but they can't kill the enemies. All they can do is put the enemies in a sort of daze. V has to go in and finish the enemies off. Then, there's V's Devil Trigger, which allows him to summon Nightmare. Wait a minute. Griffin, Panther, and Nightmare? Those were all enemies from Devil May Cry 1. I wonder if there's a connection. I'm sure it's nothing. But back to Nightmare. Activating your Devil Trigger summons him, and he can do 2 different things. One, you can just let him destroy enemies all by himself, or you can climb on his back and just obliterate everything in your path. Combine all this with the fact that you can really be far away from the enemies and just let your animal lackeys do the work, V can be the least challenging character to play as. Frankly, the main reason V is my least favorite is because of how unchallenging it can be. Thanks to his animal buddies, you never really have to get in the enemies' faces, and this is Devil May Cry. This series is all about getting in your enemies' faces. But overall, V is a cool concept, and maybe with a bit more tweaking, he could have been a great character to play as. Like Nero, for example. Nero returns from Dmc Four and is pretty much better in every way. His sword and gun are virtually unchanged from the last game. However, the majority of change to Nero comes in the form of his devil arm. Due to circumstances, he no longer has his arm from the last game. Instead, he has these robotic arms called Devil Breakers. Each of these arms has some cool abilities. They have a regular attack, and then a special attack that you can pull off by charging their attack. Now, there are quite a few of these arms, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but here are some of my favorites. Overture, which can hit the enemy with an electric blast. Punchline, which sends the arm to hit the enemy repeatedly, and charging the arm will let you ride it like a surfboard. Finally, Tomboy, which seemingly supercharges Nero's sword. Overall, playing as Nero takes what Dmc Four established with him, cranks it up to 11, and makes him a fantastic character to play as. And, I forgot to mention, after you beat the game once, Nero regains his former devil arm, so you can perform the same attacks like you did in Dmc Four, grabbing the enemies and pretty much making them your playthings. However, even with that, the next two characters are on a completely different playing field. Virgil and Dante. Now, by far, the hardest part about writing the script is choosing who's more fun to play as between Dante and Virgil. But when it comes down to it, only one of the Sons of Sparta lets you run over enemies with a motorcycle. So yeah, I like playing as Dante more. So that means the next character I'll be talking about is Virgil. Now imagine Virgil from Dmc Four, but he plays even better and is even more broken here than in the last game. And instead of having one screen clearing attack, he has 3. So yeah, Virgil is amazing, with almost every move returning from the previous game, with new gameplay that makes him even more interesting to play as, mostly involving his new Devil Trigger modes. For one, when you fill his normal Devil Trigger meter, you actually summon another Virgil to help deal insane damage to enemies. This clone sort of acts independently, but mainly mimics the moves that you make as Virgil. I'm not the best at using the clone. Frankly, I'm not the best DMC player to begin with. But from the little that I've used, the clone is quite devastating against enemies. But, if you haven't played the game, you might be wondering, if the Devil Trigger meter summons a clone, does that mean Virgil can't transform into his Devil Trigger mode? Not at all. In fact, all you need to do is fill up his Sin Devil Trigger meter. You do this by filling your normal DT meter, then take that energy and sacrifice it to build up your Sin DT meter. Once you build it up, Virgil will transform, and all of his attacks are practically supercharged. Now I know I'm probably missing some stuff about Virgil's gameplay, but honestly, Virgil is just a much better version of his gameplay from 4, and that is entirely a compliment. But now, it's time to move on to the main attraction of this game, the wacky woohoo pizza man himself, Dante. And to put it plain and simple, he is pure perfection in this game. Dante returns with a brand new arsenal in this game, and as always, we're gonna go through all of it. Now Dante has access to 3 different swords, Rebellion, Devil Sword Sparta, and Devil Sword Dante. While each of these might have their differences, overall I find them to be pretty similar to each other, so we're just gonna refer to Devil Sword Dante. Like Dante's main sword in the past, Devil Sword Dante retains most of the movesets from the past, but with a few new moves for safe measure. Balrog, which is a very interesting incarnation of the punching and kicking weapons. Instead of just having mainly punching combos, with maybe a few kicking moves into the moveset, Balrog completely changes that. It has 2 modes, kicking mode and blow or punching mode. You can switch between these modes with the press of a button, I think, and each of these modes have their own unique moveset. I'll be frank though, and say I'm not the best with this weapon, but I still really enjoy it. Next up is a returning weapon, Cerberus, the Ice Nunchucks from Dmc 3. Although just calling this thing the same would be a disservice, as this thing is almost completely different from the original. Along with the returning ice attacks, you can now do lightning attacks by holding the attack button on any combo. Also, the nunchucks can transform into a staff that produces fire, which is just incredible. Overall, I really enjoy this weapon. Now let's move on to Cavalier, a motorcycle that can break apart into 2 pieces and has chainsaws on the wheels to grind enemies. Is this real? Yeah, it's real. Cavalier is an incredible weapon. Like I said, you can grind the enemies with the motorcycle wheels. How can you not love this? This weapon is amazing, especially in situations when you are dealing with lots of demons at once. Now with that, we have gone through all of Dante's melee arsenal. Moving on to the ranged weapons, and things here are, in my opinion at least, far less interesting. Dante's pistols and shotgun return, and are largely the same before. The rocket launcher also returns and is mostly the same, except it can now do this. I think I'm in love. The one new and very interesting ranged weapon is a hat called Dr. Faust. Now, what a weird weapon this is. I'll be frank, I'm not the greatest with this weapon, but I'll try my best to explain it. Essentially, it's a hat that uses your red orbs to attack enemies. This hat has many uses, but the main thing I use it for is this. Yeah, enough said. Next thing to talk about is the Devil Trigger, which is the same as before, but what's not the same is the Sin Devil Trigger. Now we discussed the basics of the Sin Devil Trigger with Virgil earlier, but Dante is special. To me at least, Virgil's Sin DT form just has supercharged versions of Virgil's normal attacks, while Dante's Sin DT mode has more unique attacks, which is in my opinion, way more fun to play around with. Now the only thing remaining to talk about with Dante is the style system, which returns once again from the previous games. However, this time, there are only 4 main styles: Swordmaster, Gunslinger, Trickster, and Royal Guard. Bit of a shame, but I'm okay with that, as I really only ever used the 4 main styles. With that, we have finally gone through all of the playable characters in Devil May Cry 5. And to put it simply, the combat here is absolutely amazing. It takes everything from the previous 4 games and makes it better in every way. In my opinion, this game has one of the greatest combat systems I have ever experienced in a video game. Granted, playing as V is not as fun as playing as the other 3, but still, he has his qualities that I like. Now, let's move on to the bosses. And this is one part where I do think the game falls in comparison to the other parts of the game. Granted, none of the bosses are straight up bad, and there are some great ones, like the fight in Mission 18 and Cavalier Angelo, but most of them just don't stand out. Now of course, there are some exceptions. The biggest exception of course being... Virgil once again returns for another one-on-one duel. Just like before in DMC 3, it's absolutely amazing. As I have said plenty of times throughout these reviews, I love battles where it feels like you and the opponent are on equal ground. But despite that, Virgil is still a tough opponent, with plenty of moves to keep you on your toes, especially when he goes into his Devil Trigger mode. Not only is there a fight where you play as Dante against Virgil, but you also fight Virgil as Nero. The Nero fight is much easier, mainly thanks to Nero being able to do way more damage to Virgil than Dante can. All in all, the fight with Virgil is absolutely incredible, and if I had made this video before December 2020, I would have said Virgil is my favorite fight in the game. But since then, a new challenger has entered the ring. Dante is easily my favorite boss, and here's why. Take everything I said about Virgil and carry it over to Dante, but also add the unpredictability of Dante's moveset. I personally find Dante to be the more difficult boss fight. You never know what Dante is going to do next, because everything you could do while playing as Dante, he can use against you. Not to mention, as far as I can tell, Dante doesn't have a set pattern of attacks, unlike Virgil. Again, you never know what he's gonna do. So yeah, Dante is somehow even better than Virgil, and there's a sentence I never thought I'd say. Other than those though, the other fights just don't stand out compared to the ones I just mentioned. But I will say these fights are far better than the bosses of Dmc 4 and Dmc 2. Also, the enemies are much improved here from Dmc 4. because this time, all the enemies feel like they were designed with all the characters in mind, instead of just one character. Now before moving on, there's one more gameplay change that I would like to mention, and that is the complete removal of items. No health and DT recovery items, and no screen clearing items either. The only thing that takes the place of items is the gold orbs. Of course you still have items that increase your overall health bar and DT bar, but nothing that you can use in the middle of the level. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, as I think the game is perfectly balanced, but it's something to point out. The only time you can use items is when you die. You can use gold orbs to completely refill your health and DT meter. I personally never used these unless I was right at the end of a boss fight or a particularly difficult mission. Now finally, let's move on from gameplay and talk about something I haven't really brought up in any of these Devil May Cry videos. Graphics. Now honestly, graphics are pretty low on my list of things I care about. I mostly just care about the way a game plays, but if a game is really visually impressive or really ugly, I'll bring it up. Now for DMC5, good gosh, this game is absolutely gorgeous! Character models look almost photorealistic, all the attack effects look amazing, and just overall, this is an absolute technical marvel. Moving on to another subject I want to discuss, the music. As I have gone through the series, I've noticed that none of the tracks of the other games have really lived up to the first games. That is, until now. The soundtrack as a whole is great, but the best parts are the battle themes for each character. Before discussing the themes, I wanted to mention how the themes are integrated into combat. There is a system in place where the better you do in combat, the more intense the song gets. For example, if you have a D rank in combat, the music will just start, but once you reach the S rank in combat, the chorus kicks in, which makes the fights way more fun and intense. But back to talking about the battle themes specifically. Now each battle theme is great, but obviously the best battle theme is of course Virgil's theme, Bury the Light.
Bury the light deep within. Cast aside, there's no coming home. We're burning chaos in the wind, drifting in the ocean.
There are so many reasons why I love this theme. The way it represents Virgil as a character, the lyrics, the instrumental parts of the song, literally every part of this song is great. And I think even Capcom realized this, because there are two versions of this song. The normal version that you hear throughout the game, but then there's the second version that plays during the second fight with Dante. Overall, this song is my favorite track in the entire franchise. With that all out of the way, we can finally move on to the story of this game. You know what to do. Skip to this time frame if you want to avoid story spoilers. And with that out of the way, let's talk about the story of Devil May Cry 5. The game opens up on a demon invasion of a city. And then, we cut to Dante, Trish, and Lady trying to stop the demon responsible for this invasion, named Urizen. Nero steps in as well to try and defeat Urizen, but is unsuccessful. It's worth pointing out that Nero is noticeably missing an arm. This will be explained shortly. Urizen is about to finish off Nero, but Dante steps in to allow Nero and newcomer V to escape. The game fast forward to months later, where Nero and V are heading back into the demon-infested city, presumably to have a rematch with Urizen. At the beginning of Mission 2, we get the first of quite a few flashbacks in this game. This flashback shows Nero losing his arm to a mysterious figure. This mysterious figure also swipes the Yamato katana. Don't worry, later on we'll learn plenty about this mysterious figure. Back to the present day. Not a whole lot happens for quite a few missions. The most interesting thing that happens is that you rescue Lady, but even then, nothing happens to truly progress the story. That is, until halfway through the story. V starts to think of a backup plan, so he goes off to find the Devil's Sword Sparta, while Nero goes off to have a rematch with Urizen. Nothing really happens with Nero, so we're gonna stick with V. V decides to find the Devil's Sword Sparta. Eventually he does find the sword, along with an unconscious Dante. We get two more flashbacks here. The first shows that V is the one who told Dante about Urizen. The second flashback shows Dante, Lady, and Trish trying to defeat Urizen. We know how this one ends. They lose, but we also see how Dante survived. Apparently Trish gave him the Devil Sword Sparta, and Dante blocked an attack from Urizen. Back in the present day though, Dante decides to go back to face Urizen, but before he does, we learn something about V. It turns out that V is Virgil's humanity. I don't really get it either, but moving on from this, Dante makes his way to his childhood home, and then he stabs himself with his sword. Now normally, this would kill someone, but since it's Dante and we still have some missions to go, he survives and gains a new super mode. Just in time too, as it turns out Nero is about to be killed by Urizen, but Dante comes in with his new and improved super mode. He's able to take Urizen head on this time, but before he can defeat him, Urizen escapes. After this, Nero, Dante, and V decide to split up and go to find Urizen. V and Nero end up fighting a boss, and Dante actually catches up to Urizen, and seemingly defeats him, but before Dante strikes the final blow, V convinces Dante to let him strike the final blow. This goes horribly wrong and leads to the return of Virgil, and also leads to one of my favorite cutscenes in the game.
Get out of my way, Nero!
Defeating you like this has no meaning.
Come on, Virgil. Let's do this.
Heal your wounds, Dante. Get strong. After that, we'll settle the matter. Thank you, Nero.
After Virgil leaves, we get another one of my favorite moments where Dante drops a major bombshell on Nero.
I need to stop him, and that's all that matters.
I'm not gonna let you have all the fun, Dante.
You don't get it.
Let me guess. I'm dead weight? Well, you can
That's
shove
not
it
it,
up.
Nero.
What is it then?
He's your father!
What?
I had the feeling the first time I saw you, but I just wasn't sure. And then I saw how the Yamato reacted. And I was certain. He's your father. Now he needs a kicking, but I can't have you go kill your old man.
My father.
So yes, Virgil is Nero's father. A cool revelation that's been a long time coming. This also means that Dante is Nero's uncle. But moving on, Dante realizes that he needs to go face Virgil. But before he gets there, Dante must face off against Griffin, Phantom, and Nightmare, the demons that V has been using the whole game. They reveal what I hinted at earlier, that they are actually the same Griffin, Phantom, and Nightmare from the very first Devil May Cry game. Now, they want a rematch. And considering Dante has beat them before with less powers than what he has now, let's take a guess and see how this goes. Well, that could have gone better for them. And in case you're wondering, yes, the boss fights against them here are way better than in the first game. After a goodbye from Griffin, we finally head off to face Virgil, but not before learning that Nero ain't gonna be sitting this fight out.
I'll go by myself.
Finally, Dante and Virgil meet up again for the first time since Devil May Cry 3. And it actually ends in a draw.
Nero is my son.
Yeah, dumb. You can't remember through that thick skull of yours?
Well, well. That was a long time ago.
I guess you were young once too. And as much as I'd love to hear that story, I think it's about time we
ended this.
You know, normally I would explain how Nero unleashed his Devil Trigger form like that, but instead I'm gonna show you. You see, after Nero jumped out of the van earlier, he decided to call Kyrie from a phone that doesn't look like it should be working, but let's just go with it. After a pep talk from Kyrie, this happens.
I couldn't protect Kratos. To this day, I hate myself for not having enough strength. But this time is different. I swear! I'm not letting you die!
This is curious.
Nero.
What form of power is this?
What? This ends right here.
This is amazing. Also, don't ask me how his arm just magically came back, it just did. Nero decides that he isn't going to let Dante or Virgil die. And just how does he go about doing this? By punching Dante in the face and stabbing his father in the gut, of course. After the final fight, Virgil and Dante decide they need to go to the underworld and stop the demon invasion right at the source. Nero protests against this, but gets punched in the face. Afterwards, Nero and Nico drive off into the sunset. Wait a minute, I didn't even mention Nico. I'll talk about her later. But before I finish off with the story, there's actually an after-credits scene showing Dante and Virgil slaying some demons in the underworld. Beating Virgil's story actually reveals more of the scene in an after-credits part. Now, with that, we have finally finished the story of Devil May Cry 5. This is easily my favorite story in the entire franchise. Now, with that being said, I'm gonna get my one con out of the way. That being that the female characters don't really get a time in the spotlight. All Lady and Trish do is get captured and then just sit in the background. This is a shame, as the female characters in this series are really cool. There's also a new character, Nico, who's your weapons expert / driver. Speaking of driving, Nico actually has a special cutscene that plays every single time you call her to your location. Here's an example.
You're up, Nico.
No, I got you covered.
Out of the 3 female characters, Nico gets the most to do, but still, besides being the driver, she really doesn't contribute a whole lot to the story. Oh yeah, I forgot about Kyrie. Remember how much she was in Dmc Four? Yeah, well here, she's in 2 cutscenes. Even with all that being said though, I still like the female characters, but with that out of the way, we can finally talk about the things I like in this story. For one, I've always praised the voice acting in these, but here, it's better than it's ever been. Every actor clearly understands the character they're playing, and it really shows. It also helps that the dialogue is really sharp here as well, and has some really nice one-liners. It's also nice that we have a story that mainly focuses on developing Dante, since we haven't really seen that since the 3rd game. Not only that, this is just a bit of an aside, I like how Dante actually struggles with the enemy here. In Dmc Four, Dante didn't really struggle at all and he just made jokes the whole time. It kinda made me not take the whole situation seriously at all, but it's not just Dante that gets development. Nero, V, and Virgil all get nice moments of development. It's also nice not to have the focus taken away by characters we know are obviously going to die, like in Devil May Cry 4. This game puts the focus squarely on the main cast, and it's all the better for it. Now let's move on to what I didn't like, in terms of gameplay. And well, there's nothing here. You heard me. I genuinely think this is a perfect game. Now granted, there are probably some things that I could nitpick about, but they're so negligible that they really don't matter. That's mainly thanks to the amazing combat, and all the other improvements that the game has made, like removing the fixed camera angles. Thank God. Frankly, there's only one thing that has me concerned whenever I think about this game, and that's... where do they go from here? Before the game had come out, Capcom was saying that this is the end of the Sons of Sparta storyline. Not to mention, the way the game ends makes it seem like the ending of something grand. Then, there's this line Virgil says in the fight against Dante.
All things end, Dante. Even us.
I know there's a new animated series coming out, with Dante and Virgil both making appearances, along with that mobile game which I believe is called DMC Peak of Combat, which may get a North American release. But what about the main series? Where can they go from here? Is this the end of Dante, Nero, and Virgil's story? What about Lady and Trish? We ever gonna get to play as them again? In the end, maybe I'm worrying about nothing. After all, Virgil says this line in the final cutscene of his story.
What does it matter? We're still here, aren't we?
Yeah, you're probably right.
In the end, whatever happens, I'll be happy for what we got. From humble beginnings to the grand finale. It was a wild ride. But if this isn't the end, I'll be there day one to see where the series goes next. Hey everyone. I want to thank you all for sticking with these series of videos, even with the long delays between the reviews. I felt it was appropriate now that the series has ended to go through and rank all of the games from my least favorite to most favorite. Starting at the bottom, of course, it's DMC 2. What else could be here? Enough said, moving on. Next up, Dmc Four. Despite how fun it is to play as some of the characters, the enemy and level design make it simply too frustrating to find enjoyable on most days. In third place, we have Dmc 1, the one that started it all. Despite how it's aged in certain aspects, I find it really stands the test of time, and is still enjoyable to this day. Second place is Dmc 3, a true gem of an action game, the one that would define the series for years. It truly is a great game. In the top spot, the first place is Dmc 5. Not only is this my favorite game in the series, but one of my favorite games of all time. Dmc 5 is a true treasure of a game. Everything from the previous games is perfected here, and it feels great. Again, thank you all for sticking through this series and the delays that came with it. I really do appreciate it. I hope you stick around and take a look at the upcoming content I have planned for the future. But until then, thank you all so much for watching. Have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you all next time. Later, everyone.